Excellent. All right, I'll declare this meeting of the committee open as we have a quorum, and I advise that the meeting is being streamed live to the City of Adelaide website, and a recording will also be published to the internet. Please note that this recording means that your presence at and any contribution you make to the meeting may be collected, used, disclosed or published publicly by the City of Adelaide, including transferring outside of Australia. Council acknowledges that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we pay respect to their elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. And we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations who are present today. Item 2, apologies and leave of absence. I know Anne Moran is an apology, Councillor Sims is an apology, and Councillor Abrahimzadeh will be a few minutes late. And of course, just indulge me for a moment. Obviously, I wish to welcome Councillor Greg Mackey, OAM, back to the chamber. Very much looking forward to the contributions that you'll no doubt make over the next few years alongside all of us. Looking forward to meeting in person again at some point in the future as well. But wherever you're joining us from in the Greater Metropolitan Area, welcome. All right, item 3, confirmation of the minutes. Can I have a mover and a seconder that these are a true and accurate record? Moved by Councillor Kira, seconded by Councillor Knoll. Is there anyone who wishes to query anything about the minutes or make any commentary? If not, we'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And that is carried. Bringing us to discussion forum items, and I will pass over to Claire.
Excellent. Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. So tonight I want to take you through the proposed approach for the 2020-2021 business plan and budget, and also some revised timeframes. Continuing the approach we've undertaken to date through the numerous briefings, financial briefings during the COVID period, I also want to just work us through the primary financial levers that Council can use in response not only to COVID-19 but also to create capacity to support the city's recovery. And these recovery principles, we've presented those alongside each of the financial levers to help draw the relationship between what's possible. And these are designed to help guide your decision making and how you're going to help the city recover from the impacts that we've experienced in the last couple of months, but also to help ensure the long-term financial sustainability of the council. And as I've said on a number of occasions in the last couple of months, regardless of the COVID-19 challenges, I'll be working with you to resolve the challenge we've had over the last couple of years of our underlying operational deficit. So I'm hoping tonight to get your thoughts and feedback. You'll see a lot of the questions have been posed, giving you alternative options. The chair will work you through those slides as and when we get to them. I do believe that we can manage our short-term cash flow. I do think we can create capacity to fund initiatives to support the city to recover. We can absolutely make really good progress towards achieving a balanced operating surplus if we make those choices about our financial levers in the context of the recovery principles. Something new that we haven't spoken about previously, by the end of June, we will be asking you to approve an expenditure framework, and that's to ensure that we have funding available from the 1st of July. And that's in relation to fees and charges and making sure that the operational side of the business can continue. So tonight we'll appreciate your feedback as we work through it. And we've also shared with you some proposed strategic projects, and Clinton will work you through the infrastructure program as well. So next slide, thanks Jenny, if you can just go to slide 3. So those key questions are there, but if you'd just indulge me for a while longer, I'd just want to work you through the two-stage approach to the budget. So next slide. Thanks, Jenny. So when we briefed you back on the 5th of May, we did share a proposed timeline around engagement and input into the business plan and budget. And we were looking to utilise the Minister for Local Government's opportunity around adopting the business plan and budget in November 2020 and align our budget along with the state and federal timeframes. However, under section 153 of the Local Government Act, we actually can't declare general rates until we've adopted our business plan and budget. And so with our income still uncertain and fluctuating, deferring the adoption to November, we believe would have significant cash flow implications, and that would just compound some of the recent experiences that we've had on our revenue over the last couple of months. So what we're proposing is a prudent approach. So approval of the 2020-2021 fees and charges via an expenditure framework by the end of June. So that will enable the continuation of services and delivery of the key projects for the community until the business plan and budget is adopted in August, following obviously the statutory requirements around public consultation. And this expenditure framework is important because it will also incorporate the operational expenditure based on the draft budget, the retimed and reprioritised strategic projects, and allow infrastructure works to commence from the 1st of July. It will also enable council rates notices for the first quarter to be issued by the end of August, with the first instalment due to the end of September. So it does allow a bit more time for our ratepayers. And balancing our cash flow with anticipated income. We will know more on the 9th of June how council wishes to respond to the recent motion on notice in relation to options around relief for our commercial ratepayers. So on the 9th of June, that report will be coming direct into the chamber as per the recent motion on notice. So all that's still in flux. So as a result of that, I think it's prudent to do an expenditure framework by the end of this month and then continue building the business plan and budget. Any questions on that? Happy to keep going. So the next slide, the budget approach, this is the rough sort of timeline at this point. The dates are still a bit fluctuating, so we're endeavouring to try and utilise Tuesday nights, but there may be other sessions needed depending on the amount of feedback that council members wish to provide. But as I've mentioned earlier, at the 23rd of June council meeting, we'll be bringing an expenditure framework through to you for your consideration. Okay, so if we go to the financial levers, just an overview and a reminder, we have been sharing these with you over the past few months. Obviously, our main sources of income come from rates and fees and charges, and as you know, members are fully aware, that's obviously quite a different mix in terms of how our income is generated. And the income from our fees and charges and rates are used predominantly to deliver the core community services such as rubbish, roads, libraries, and the infrastructure renewals programme. Our other key component is our capacity to borrow and the principles of why and when we would access borrowings. Obviously, how we manage on the expenditure side, the renewal and enhancement of the city's infrastructure, and Clinton will work you through the approach based on condition audits data and a risk-based approach to what that could look like next year. And then the operations, which is predominantly the services that we provide to the community, but also members will be aware for a long period of time we've been on a journey to make sure that the efficiency and effectiveness of those services are under our view, and the commitment is that we'll be working with council members in the next couple of weeks, in particular to work through how the framework associated with delivering on the $20 million requirement to reduce our operations by. So we're building a framework, and we'll share that with members in the next couple of weeks. So if we go to the next slide, Jenny. Rates, fees and charges, you've seen these comparisons previously. Only 56% of our overall income comes from rates, and we are heavily reliant on fees and charges. And the impacts that we have been experiencing in the last couple of months will, we believe, continue to be felt for a little bit longer. Just an update on the financial results since QF3 for April 2020. They were in line with what we had forecast, and we're continuing to closely monitor the loss of income from parking, commercial businesses, events, and the cash flow from rates. As at today, we've received 11.88% of our Q4 rates so far, noting the due date is the 1st of June 2020, and this compares to 12.12% received at the same time last year, so just slightly under. To date, we've received 119 rates hardship applications for 172 assessments, and that represents just under 1% of our total assessments of just over 26,000. And 82 applications are from commercial ratepayers. So obviously, with the due date for rates notices next week, in the coming weeks, we'll have more of an insight into how that's tracking. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be bringing that report to you in response to the recent motion on notice for June the 9th. Fees and charges, as I already mentioned, we are monitoring that really closely, in particular on-street parking. So the $8 initiative in new parks is basically ensure that those are remaining steady. In fact, I'm hearing some people actually can't get into U parks at the moment, which is good. Unfortunately, we don't have the same experience on street. So so just an update on that. We can go to the next slide, please, Jenny. So the long-term financial plan currently has the assumption that rates growth of 3% would be envisaged, and that main component of growth is from new development of 2.2% and about 1% in uplift in valuations. That top graph illustrates the rates income if the rate in the dollar was indexed by CPI. And in freezing the rate in the dollar, previous council and this council last year, so since 2014-15, we have been diligently freezing that rate in the dollar. Where valuations uplift was lower than CPI, making sure that the impact on ratepayers was managed. The bottom graph shows you what the annual growth from new developments and capital improvements looks like. And interestingly, we have seen SCAP approvals this week. They approved a $14 million new city development, the DeFava Group off Peary Street, and also Field Street student accommodation near Chinatown. However, I don't want to get too carried away or too excited because we all know that, in times like this, of any sort of global crisis, new developments often impacted. When it comes to fees and charges, the long-term financial plan had an assumption of 2%, which was based on CPI. And the non-commercial fees and charges as a total were forecast to be 10.4 mil, of which on-street ticketed parking is 9.4 million. So that's the bit that we're struggling over the last couple of months to realise. So we anticipate that will happen in the coming weeks, still be quite a challenge for us. So what I'll do with the next slide is probably hand back to the Deputy Lord Mayor. And so really what we're interested in understanding and asking the chair to work through is some questions here, just to get your level of feedback on some different options. I have, when it comes to the rate in the dollar, obviously there is an option there to reduce the rate in the dollar as well, which we didn't include, but I'm sure if council members feel strongly about that, we can do some additional modelling. So if I could hand back to you, Deputy Lord Mayor, to please just work the members through this slide, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you to you and your team for pulling all this together. It's a lot of information, but very, very important. Look, I'm not running an Ipsos poll here, but we will take it in some parts. So we'll go to the key question first. How do members wish to utilise rates, fees and charges? And of course, there's two options there. In my mind, there's a C, which is reduce them, but we'll leave that to the discussion. Councillor Kira first, and just a reminder, I can't see all your hands because we're in a workshop and we're not voting on anything. I'm not looking to see whether you're doing this or not, so make sure you're using your electronic hand, please, so I can see that accordingly. We'll leave the slide up there, Jenny, just to keep people's minds going, and Jesse, over to you.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Look, I think it goes without saying that we must proceed cautiously and prudently. Having said that, I think we've got to be mindful of the public relations element involved in our decisions with respect to the budget and with respect particularly to rates. I think there's a very significant aspect of messaging if we were to increase, if we were to decide to cause any real increase in rates. I think it would be very counterproductive, and I think that although we may be going through significant pain at the moment, the scope for increases in rates should come probably the following year if it is warranted, and certainly not this year. So obviously my answer is to this, that we must strive to maintain rates, continue to freeze the rate without question, and also to use the discretionary rebate to reduce any effects of valuation. I do recognise that places additional pressure on the administration, but I think that now of all times, we've got to recognise the imperative is to function efficiently, and that the single biggest stimulus incentive, the single biggest aid we can provide economically to our constituents will be in the form of rates reductions, or at the very least maintaining rates where they are. But let's not forget, you know, increasing rates, increasing expenses is the very last thing. It's counterproductive to a stimulus, with the proviso that essential services must continue and essential discretionary spending must continue. So that does not mean we cut all our programs. But I do think we've got to keep that in mind. I think that's the absolute imperative from my perspective.
Thank you, Jesse, for that considered response. Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. How many ratepayers does the discretionary rebate apply to in a normal year, and what sort of quantum is it? What sort of dollar quantum are we talking about?
I don't have that to hand, sorry, Lord Mayor.
Could we find out? Because it's a little bit trying to, you know, I'm not quite sure what that means in terms of our budget. Is it a large amount, a small amount? Is it, I mean, it's a bit like the hardship policy, which has always been in place, which we have promoted to our ratepayers, so given the circumstance, and so we're keeping tabs on what that is and what that means, but I'm not sure what this one does.
I've got a dollar value, but I
Yeah.
don't know the number of ratepayers. So if you were to adjust the discretionary rebate to 0%, it would have a reduction of $1 million. $1 million.
Okay. All right, so it's not huge.
No.
I agree that we should continue to freeze the rate in the dollar, particularly in the circumstances that we find ourselves in. I certainly wouldn't support an increase in the rate in the dollar at this point in time, though I do believe at some point we have to go back to a CPI increase of rate in the dollar to look at the budget and our ability to deliver on services to the city, but certainly not for this year. And I would also look at holding fees and charges until January, at which point, which is a 6-month period, at which point I think we should relook at it. So depending on what the recovery has been like and what the circumstances are for our businesses and residents in the city, we can make a decision at that point. The other thing, sorry, just while I've got you, the other thing that I would like people to consider, which isn't this, but I think context is everything. As you all know, Malinowskis is prosecuting his case and will take the bill into Parliament next week. My understanding is if that bill gets through, that will be in place for about 3 quarters, which is a $25 million hit per quarter, so $75 million to our bottom line, on top of the $30 million that we've already hit that we're already taking through our commercial operations. It also has the third part of the bill. The kicker is that there's no ability to stand down or reduce employees' hours due to the reduction of our income. So that is an that's approximately $105 million hit to our bottom line. And I think that that needs some very serious consideration in the light of what we may or may not be able to do if that bill gets through.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. We'll go to Councillor Noel.
Yes, thank you. And also thank you to administration. I can appreciate how hard it all is. Question one, certainly of course, freezing the rate of the dollar, certainly that's for the time being a no-brainer anyway, until we actually sort of start to see what the recovery and whatever it looks like as slow as what I think it's going to be. My question is the CPI. What is our anticipation of a CPI? Because I mean, it's in there, but has the administration got an idea what that looks like?
Yeah, so in March it was 2.4%, which the impact we reckon would be $1.5 million.
But what is the actual CPI percentage that they're talking about? Because I mean,
2.4%. CPI is 2.4. Yeah.
It's still going up 2.4 as all the rest of the time.
As March. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yes, I think we do need to put a bit of a hold on things as well, and then see what we need to do. And I do agree with the Lord Mayor that we then can revisit that, and as people become capable, that we sort of try to get our books back in balance as well, at least as a start. And yeah, without fully understanding how our ratepayers across the board are faring. I mean, we're still looking at how can we help those most in need, and of course there's so many of them, while not ruining our income base. So that, I mean, so some still okay, and obviously not the whole economy has collapsed. It is about a third, I think, that is in dire need. How can we help those so that they stay with us and still be fair and reasonable to the rest? And I don't have any particular understanding yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Franz. Councillor Martin. It'll work.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good. Look, in order of the questions as they're asked, yes, adjust the discretionary rate rebate. Do not include revaluations, and in fact, I'm surprised to hear that there may be revaluations. Where there is an uplift, it should not be considered for inclusion in any rate notice. And even if it's $1 million and it affects 10, 15, 20 people, do not apply it. We need to exercise a great deal of caution. Insofar as the rate in the dollar is concerned, we had as a council already resolved before the pandemic began that we would freeze rates, and a concession to freeze rates in the dollar is a great step, but I think we do need to go further. I argued, as you'll recall, in council for a freeze on rates completely for businesses, for the commercial sector, which comprises about 75% of our ratepayers at council, which was argued somewhat passionately against. But I remain more convinced than ever that this council ought to take the initiative and offer rate relief for commercial enterprises or using whatever criteria are necessary for a period of 3 months. And my feeling is that should be from September. September is when the federal government job seeker allowance will cut out. And I believe that there will be a substantial impact on employment and on business at that time. Now, I know I have heard the arguments that it's unaffordable, but the information I have is the cost of doing that for commercial enterprises would only be at the order of $16 to $18 million. That is considerably less than the operating deficits that we've had in each of the last 3 financial years. I think it is affordable. Moreover, I think it's something we need to do. Other councils are doing as much, in some cases more. It is something that I would like on the table. And I don't think we should be waiting for state parliament, and I'm not sure that it's actually likely that the Malinauskas proposal will be successful, but I don't think we should be waiting for Parliament to impose any measures on us. I think we should be acting independently and with great speed. Insofar as fees and charges are concerned, again, I don't see a case for increasing fees and charges. I am surprised to see that there's an estimate of 2.4% on the CPI. I'm not certain whether that has taken into account any forecast for the last quarter of the financial year, but I would have speculated that any increase at the March quarter will be completely wiped out by whatever the outcome of the June quarter is. But I would go a step further and say, not only should we be not applying any increase to fees and charges, we should be asking the government, where it controls the fees and charges that we levy, we should be asking them to not increase them. It is a very small gesture, but I think it is one that we should take on our own initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Kira.
Right, thanks, Chair. Look, I certainly concur with Councillor Martin's advocacy or suggestion that for our advocacy about the state government and imposed fees and charges. That's eminently good sense. I just have a question of the administration, Claire, or someone else perhaps. There was mention about the UPark incentive scheme, I think the $8 incentive scheme, resulting in a very, if I heard right, significant uplift in uptake of those parking facilities. If that's correct, is there room to expand that out onto the street? Is there any constraint on any similar incentive schemes that might get people in and parking now, and then, you know, cement that down the track when the parking fees have to go up naturally?
From an on-street perspective, what we're looking at is using the smart parking app to incentivise people into different areas of the paid parking. So I can share a bit more information with members on that. We're a couple of weeks away from being able to do something with it. But that's what we're hoping to try and do to entice people into the on-street parking bays. And we're also really mindful of making sure that we don't use on-street in a way that negatively impacts the off-street. So it's that those two elements are quite closely entwined. But there was I think there might have been a motion recently asking us to look at how we can use smart parking differently on the street. So that's what we've been investigating. Once I have something to share, I can bring that through.
Yeah, great. That'd be great. So you don't think there is no constraint at the moment on the administration exploring or at short notice undertaking fairly radical changes to parking to just lure people in? You don't think there's any constraint? There's no need for a motion to allow anything like that? Or has anything like that really been looked into, I suppose, as well, given the success of the UPark scheme?
And I can talk to on-street. In terms of on-street, what we have been working through is the legislative requirement around pricing and ticket machines, and then the app. So for us to use a flexible approach on-street, we've just had to get some advice around the mechanism to be able to do that, because the understanding previously has been that actually you, once that price is set, you have less ability to do any sort of demand pricing. So if Rundle Street's a really good example. So ticket pricing was put into Rundle Street. We've known for the last couple of years that that area is underutilised. And so is there a way we could, drop those prices really quickly? And we know more people are driving into the city. So we're still, we're working through that. And then I can bring that back and share with you. I don't think we need a motion to do it. It's work that's already underway. The other thing that, I would be keen to explore with members at some point is the concept around increasing where paid parking currently is. So we had talked previously, and it might have been at the last budget cycle, around the fact that I think it's around 2,300 of our 17,000 on-street car parking spaces are paid. And we had talked previously and looked at doing some modelling, particularly in areas where commuters park, and perhaps trialling some sort of, paid parking for those areas where we know commuters are parking all day. But that's work that's still underway, and I'm happy to, bring that through to council as and when it's ready.
Thanks. Sorry, just on that, Claire, a follow-up question. Are you saying that there are legislative barriers to us implementing an on-demand scheme that would actually probably be priced by a computer, such as Uber is or something like that? Sorry, we'll just see if that unmuting works. There we go.
That was the last I heard. We were getting some legal advice, but I can follow up. I'd need to just double check that. I hadn't got the answer internally, so I know the team was looking into it.
Yep, all right. Thank you. Now, just before I go back to Councillor Kira, Councillor Mackie, I saw your hand pop up, but it's disappeared. Did you still want to just nod if you're yes? Yeah, all right, we'll go straight to you, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Question in relation to our car parking business operations. Are there any competitive neutrality issues given the share of off-street parking that we operate in relation to a marketplace where there are commercial operators? And do we have any, the follow-up question is, do we have any indication at this point as to what the commercial off-street car parking operators are doing, if anything, in response to the pandemic activity reduction?
My colleague director here. Oh, yeah. Ian's going to answer that one.
Sorry, thanks, Councillor. Back through the chair. Look, it's a very competitive marketplace. We're in around off-street car parking, and we put our UPark Plus product into the marketplace, $8 flat fee. Wilson's and others have done some similar things. I think there's a price point for $7 a day in the marketplace as we speak. Others are at $9. I would make the point too that at $8, really there were a couple of reasons why we put that in place, UPark Plus. One was a touchless and seamless experience for the consumer, so they could link it to their debit card and credit card. But we're also hemorrhaging some money. So even at $8 a day, that's pretty much stopped the bleed, but we're certainly nowhere near the revenues that we were pre-COVID.
All right. Councillor Kira.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to very quickly reinforce that point raised by Claire earlier about instituting paid parking where there currently is free parking where that's warranted. I think that's actually very important. Even though I'm a very strong advocate for encouraging driving and parking to the city, as it's the #1 way to enable our city to flourish commercially. I think where there is currently free parking and it's outside of a residential area and it is utilised for commuting or for commercial reasons, it's actually a distortion in the market if we are not to be charging adequate paid parking. So there's a very good case for that to be thoroughly explored, and I really do support that.
Thank you, Jesse. And just a quick reminder to councillors, we don't want to go too far down the parking rabbit hole because we are trying to give feedback on rates, fees and charges, but we'll go to Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I will respond on the parking issue on the basis of you're allowing a remark from Councillor Kira. And I wish to make very clear to the administration that any attempt to introduce paid parking to the residential streets of North Adelaide, which it's well known are all-day parking grounds for commuters, any attempt to introduce paid parking without a residential permit system, perhaps one similar to the one that the team rejected, would be foolish.
Understood.
Yes, I don't think that was the intent. Was that the intent, Claire?
No, it wasn't. It was more around the modelling we've done around the eastern and southern sides of the city.
I'm very relieved to hear that. Thank you.
As are we all. Councillor Kouros.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say also, this is a great piece of work. It's been really easy to follow. So I do appreciate how this has been presented. In answer to your questions and to bring the focus to what you're wanting to hear from us, take into consideration, we are a very unique council. I mean, 77% of our rates are commercial, and 56% of our income is derived from rates in comparison to other councils. But in taking that into account, I mean, it is important that we continue to freeze the rate. It has been what the council, previous Temper Council have advocated for. It's what we have always advocated for. And we want to support our city and our businesses in that way and not increase it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but as we've always said, it is something that comes at budget time, and it is something that we can only implement at budget time. So being that it is, I think we're all unanimous in that decision, by the sounds of it, to keep it that way. I would also, in answer to your question, hold the fees and charges for 2020 and 2021. I mean, if you want to revisit it, I guess it's just a workshop to do so, but I think there are going to be implications with employment and with businesses once the job seeker and job keeper and all of that stops, and we're going to hit another wave of some sort of economic support for the businesses and city overall. I do actually agree that we need to advocate for the state government to support us in areas where they can support us. So that is something that if we could look at and go down that path as well. They're my thoughts at the present time in regards to your questions.
Thank you, Councillor Couros. Councillor Hode.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to Claire, though, like how much it will cost us, like say per quarter, for us to manage the cost, our core service? Roughly, I mean, I don't need an exact number though.
Down to the definition of core service, which is a loaded question in and of itself.
Well, I mean, rates, roads, and rubbish. The 3 R's.
Not much. Claire, you apply.
40, yeah, it's 43 million a quarter for
43.
operations.
Wow. Okay. So, and we are, I mean, how much income we are picking up in the last one? I mean, in the last quarter, though. From the rates as well as
rates
other
was,
fees and charges.
Yeah, 27 for rates.
Wow.
And what were fees and charges? All that?
23.
Yeah, about 23, 24 fees and charges.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Members, any other remarks on this point? I might just make a couple of my own before we continue. No? Okay, I'll just say very quickly, just rolling through them. On the key question, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but I'm of the view that we should always be seeking to reduce the tax burden that we impose on the ratepayers in the city. I think now more than ever, it would be good to give a rate reduction because it would actually provide, as opposed to just a waiver, it would actually provide some investment certainty and position us as a key destination for investment in the future if people are confident that they know that we're the most competitive local government jurisdiction in the country. So as far as capital cities go, that's my long-held view as well. I'm of the view that had we been in a better financial position before COVID, we would actually be in a position to offer more assistance to our ratepayers now. And I think that's what we need to bear in mind. So to the key question, I would add a C, reduce the rate in the dollar. Coming to fees and charges, they definitely need to go on hold for this financial year. We couldn't possibly put up any fees and charges or any charge that we levy on people, whether it's applying for a permit for this or that, or other such fees and charges. We just shouldn't be putting them up in this environment. People perhaps couldn't have even afforded to pay some of them before, and there's a fair chance that they won't now. And we know that the fallout from this pandemic, as far as the economy is concerned, is going to be going on for a long time. If COVID's here with us to stay, the economic impact will stay with us a lot longer than that. I've seen many reports from consulting firms that are saying, it's going to take us 4 years to get to where we were in January 2020. That's the reality. We can't be putting up fees and charges now, and we may well not be in a position to put them up in the future, or even if we do put them up, people might not be in a position to pay them. So as far as valuations go, I would be very interested to see what happens with valuations in the sense that some may go down. And so I would suggest applying a principle in that if properties decrease in value, then we apply the discount. If they increase in value, then we defer the increase at least until next financial year. Is my view. Now it's different when you've got new properties and new developments coming online. That's something that didn't exist before, so I don't think that principle applies there. But those are my brief views, and whether I intended to or not, I think it's solicited some other thoughts. So we'll go to Councillor Martin first.
Oh, Chair, I just wanted to congratulate you. I found myself instinctively nodding to what you were saying and thought, what an unusual feeling. Thank you very much.
Always happy to make you feel good, Phil. Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm just going to clarify some figures that I said before because I was looking at the wrong calc. So I was looking at a different sheet in front of me. The bill that's proposed, obviously, sorry, only is applied to those businesses that have been closed under the Prime Minister's direction, and therefore the calculation is different. So it's between $9 and $11 million a quarter, which is about 30 to add to the losses that we've already incurred. That is still a huge hit to our bottom line, including the provisions that are there. But that actually just for clarification in terms of those numbers.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just wanted to state, I guess, what is quite obvious. First of all, I must say it's really good to get some feedback and good to get the questions tonight. But, you know, we need to recognise the financial impacts we've already experienced. We need to recognise the financial impacts that are still yet to play out, and we can only estimate those. Fully understand the desire to freeze or lower rates in the dollar. Fully understand the desire to freeze or lower fees and charges. But, you know, financial sustainability is crucial. It is a requirement. And I think we need to recognise that in the current environment, as a council, we really do need to adjust what we do, how we do it. And so the challenge we're going to have in this immediate future is going to be having a close look at our service provision, having a close look at our resourcing, and resetting the organisation to fit what is the model that you are looking to achieve. So this is a really good conversation to set the scene for that. I think we've really got to think really clearly and think very hard about what it is you're looking to adjust to enable the outcome you're looking for. And tonight is a good lead into that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. And I reckon we're done with that one. Now, if we can move on. And Claire, am I passing back to you to continue on? No. Another director. Hold on.
Apologies. Yes, you are. Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. It's because I need to go to the bathroom. I'm actually going to hand over to Alex, who'll just talk you through the next two slides in relation to borrowings. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and through the chair. So the next lever we want to just talk through this evening is the borrowings. And as you are all aware, we've currently got prudential borrowing limits. They are set by you as the council. And what we're doing is proposing that you consider reviewing that. And at the moment, we've got three different tests that we use. We use the asset test, which looks at what the borrowings are relative to sellable assets, and they are the property assets. The leverage test, which looks at our ability to pay down debt quickly if we needed to. And then our debt service coverage ratio, which is effectively to look at what percentage or what proportion of our operations are used to fund both the principal repayments and the interest repayments. So what we're putting forward for consideration is revision to the asset test, moving that from 25% of sellable assets up to 50% of sellable assets. We think that's still more than reasonable as a limit, but that's something to consider. The second is the leverage test. Now, presently that is based on funds available for projects, but that is not necessarily a consistent number. What we're proposing is to use a much more consistent base, which is our rates revenue. And that would still be 1.5 times, so effectively paying that down based on rates revenue for the 1.5 years. The third is our interest expense ratio, which would replace the debt service ratio. The reason why we're putting that forward for consideration is that it's we don't have a linear repayment in terms of the principal repayment, we need to make sure we can fund our interest repayments. And so that, particularly given the mix of what we're seeking to fund, that is a much more sensible test. And it's also one that the local government financing authority uses. So the effect of that would be to raise our current prudential limit, which is presently about $80 million, up to potentially $175 million. Of course, that's subject to circumstances at any particular time. The other thing that's also really important to just note is that if and when we come close to a prudential limit at any point in time, that then comes back to you to flag that we are reaching or getting close to that, and what potential mechanisms we have in place to manage that. Jenny, if we could just move to the next slide. So I think the key point to just highlight here is the recovery principles again. We are utilising borrowing, or proposing that borrowings are utilised going forward to really help stimulate growth, and in particular that would be to invest in income generating assets. So not to fund our operations on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so Chair, back to you.
Yeah, do you have anything further to add? Okay. That one's pretty straightforward. Nevertheless, it is a big question to ask. We'll go to Councillor Kira first.
Thanks. Can I be heard? Yeah.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Just a comment. I'm finding it would be useful, particularly right now with such big and important decisions. But some of the charts, some of the graphs or lists you've got, like taking the interest expense ratio, it'd be good to see that going back a few more years than just the last 2 years. It'd be great to see the last 10 years, for example, to give just a really bigger picture of where we're at and what we're doing, how out of the ordinary what we're doing. It's quite difficult as a new councillor to put in perspective without that kind of longer frame thing. So I'm just impressed upon the administration. If it's not too difficult in future, that would be great. So, you know, I mean, it's very hard. I think borrowing is low, and it's never been as low as it is now, I think, even in real terms. And it looks like there is going to be absolutely zero political appetite for any kind of increase in interest rates. As bad policy as I think that is, I don't see that changing for the next decade or two, to be frank. But having said that, I think we really ought to adhere to the principle that borrowing, an increase in borrowing, which I could really support under the right circumstances, but an increase in the prudential limit must be based around assets and either asset regeneration or new income streams. It must not be there to finance delivery of core services. And I go back again to Simon's question from earlier. I think that's a very good and valid question. I think we need a very clear indication. What does it cost? What does it cost for the roads, rates and rubbish element of our operating expenses? Not all the other stuff. What do we need to, what income do we need to pay for the 3 R's? I think that's something I'd humbly suggest we need a clear indication of. We must not borrow for that. That must be made efficient. That has got to be made efficient. That's the brutal reality. And borrowing has got to be about assets and asset regeneration. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Kira. Members, please enlighten us as to your views. Councillor Noel.
Well, I mean, as difficult as you know, let's face it, we are obviously at a time, we've obviously got a crisis. The other crisis is that we are in a time where we need to now reimagine how we're going to get income streams and things like that. We also have a time where the borrowing of the money, and it is absolutely correct to agree with the others, is that it's as low as it can be. In other words, if we use this wisely, We're not paying a premium for ideas and new directions for the council, for finding ways to get income, because obviously we do have to transition somehow. So I think the only concern I have is then that we hold ourselves very tightly onto a set of guidelines that say, in these circumstances, this is how we borrow the money, and for these purposes, because it is going to bring back to us a benefit for the expense. And I think that's so, because it's not about our council, it's the next council as well. And if we are not careful, then another council with another viewpoint can use that possibly and then twist the concept that we're trying to achieve. So it's a little bit, yes, raising the prudential limits is okay. Being very clear on how we're going to spend to make sure that we are limited to those things that deliver that. And of course, never to borrow for the running of your business, because in the instance that we have here, even if this awful time now, that it's not, well, it doesn't impact your entire year at this minute, but it will impact a number of years by decreased incomes. So that would be my main idea.
Thank you, Franz. Councillor Mackie.
Thank you, Chair. In furious agreement. I'm comfortable about a consideration of increasing the prudential borrowings limit. These are absolutely extraordinary times, and as a tier of government, we share a responsibility with the state and federal governments to do what we can, almost in a Keynesian way, to stimulate the economy. I would qualify, though, in regard to what would constitute a suitable asset to acquire. This is perhaps not the right time, perhaps, to be land banking, unless there is a specific end result that is going to enhance prosperity, livability of our city. We also have a role to play in the generation of jobs and activity. And so, of course, construction equals jobs. We also have to have regard, I think, to the impact of the prospective economic downturn on our own asset value. And if indeed there is a write-down in property values, then that is going to affect the end number that we use to calculate what our prudential borrowing, it ought to be used to help calculate what our prudential borrowing limit might change to. But in terms of the general principles that our fellow councillors have espoused, I'm very simpatico with that.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I also agree. Thank you for that. That's very clear. I think the key is not to fund operations or asset renewals. We all know that the deficits and the reason that we are where we are in terms of finances, the decisions of the last few councils, one of which I was on, of course, but it was monies borrowed for asset renewal rather than revenue generating investments, and we need to get that right. So again, I support what Councillor Knoll said, as long as we've got really clear criteria. I do think that all levels of government are being asked to look to their balance sheets. It is, a crazy, extraordinary time. And we also, need to look back and see what happened 100 years ago in terms of when the world had a global recession and depression. And we need to make sure we don't get to that point. Therefore, we need to be able to use our money wisely and borrow at those very, very low percentage limits. As Councillor Kira said, money has never been cheaper. It doesn't mean that we go wild. It means that we have a very strategic, very clear, very focused criteria for what we're going to use it on, and understanding that we are looking for want of a better word, or for Director Hill's favourite word, city shaping projects that are also going to generate revenues for futures, just in the same way that previous councils invested in the UPark business, which set us up for 40 years or 50 years of revenue. We need to be that council that uses our borrowings to set up the next 20, 30 years of council revenue streams. To that end, in terms of what that actual number looks like, I would say I probably need just a little bit more information in terms of setting a capacity limit. Certainly, you know, I think in order of 150 or something would give us the capacity to look at those emerging priorities. But obviously, also there's a level of caution. So as long as we're really clear as to where we're going to go with that and how we're going to use that. There are also, as everybody is aware of, an extraordinary amount of stimulus packages that are coming through, both from state and federal government, and we need to be able to leverage those grant opportunities as they come through. Again, with one mind, very clear that we are not funding operations or asset renewals. So that's me agreeing with the increase to the potential limit. Just a little bit more information around what that might be.
Thank you, Sandy. Councillor Couros.
Thank you, Chair. I guess we're, if you're asking the question, do we agree? And I think that, yeah, it seems as if everyone agrees, but obviously I agree with Councillor Knoll and Councillor Kira. You know, we have to make sure that we set the criteria, and obviously, like Lord Mayor said, you know, to borrow to run your business is not the way to go, and we need to make sure that we get a percentage return on the money that we borrow to increase the support that we can give to the city. And obviously we have to look at, you know, growth, and we have to look at being able to, you know, sustain for the jobs that, you know, we hope that be able to get for the future in the city. So I guess we need to be mindful about where what we borrow the money for, and yeah, we need more information on that, but open to the idea, but need to have more of a discussion around it and what that looks like, and where the money will be going for us to get bang for our buck.
Martin. Coming. It's coming. Maybe it's not. Doesn't want you to talk, Phil. Jenny, can you press it? I'm pressing it.
Doesn't seem to want me to do. Oh, there we go.
Excellent. All right, you're live, Phil.
Thank you. Look, it is heartening to hear so many councillors agree that it's not appropriate to fund your day-to-day operations with debt, but that is what we have done, and this council has been responsible for the majority of our debt to fund our day-to-day operations. It does our reputation no good to go further and to borrow such a large sum of money. And I say that for two reasons. The first is that the amount is staggering. A $175 million debt is an amount of money, a debt that is greater than any other in the history of the city of Adelaide. This kind of borrowing is likely to mortgage the future of this city. It will certainly bind the hands of future councils for decades to come. It will also trouble our ratepayers. it represents a borrowing of $175 million, represents $7,000 for every ratepayer in the city of Adelaide. And that doesn't mean a lot to large corporations. I'm sure that Woolworths or Coles Myer would shrug it off in an afternoon. But for many of the city's battlers, residents, pensioners, families, the prospect of a $7,000 debt, courtesy of the city hanging over their head, is something that's going to be quite daunting. Now, look, I am not opposed to borrowing for the sake of the creation of projects, and especially income-producing projects. But what we have in this question is whether or not we would be prepared to approve an extra limit on the credit card without any detail whatever. There is nothing to prevent the administration bringing to us individual projects that we as a council can approve based on their merits. But to be presenting us with an option to approve a large debt without understanding what the nature of that debt is to my mind, going to rankle the community. I'm happy for us to consider up to a reasonable limit approval for individual projects. But for the council to say, yep, let's max the card for another $100 million would seem to me to be imprudent. And I am guessing that there are many people looking at us right now saying, well, why the hell are they thinking that? I'd urge extreme caution.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. And there's just a couple of points I need to clarify, but I'll also pass to the CEO. The first one is that you said that we are approving debt. That's not the case. We are moving the line in the sand, which determines how much debt we can take on. Any further funding commitments that we make as a council still need to come through to us. So we'll still be ticking off on those things and of course judging them on their merits. And I'll just pass to Mark to clarify a couple points as well. It was said that this council is responsible for the operational deficits, which I actually don't think is the case, but if you could clarify that.
Yeah, through your chair, council has been running operational deficits for a number of years at the moment, and so it's not just this particular council, it's been the previous council and this council. That's largely due to a significant increase in capital projects that have been enabled through partnership with the state government. So that's fundamentally why we currently have the deficit trend that we've seen over the last few years.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Martin, did you have something to add there?
Well, look, I'd just like to ask in response of the CEO, of our $73 million borrowings at the end of March, what was the deficit for the 2 financial years of this council?
Just unmute you, Mark, and of course I think it needs to be made clear how many budgets this council has actually approved.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I'll get the finance team to respond to that because there's some clarity required. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, so Councillor Martin, were you looking for the operating deficit or the funding deficit?
No, the operating deficit.
17. Oh, from memory, I think we reported in the annual report, it was around 18, just over 18 million last financial year. The year before that, yeah, it was just slightly under 17 million the year before that. And then previously, I think it would have been a funding deficit as opposed to an operating deficit that we were reporting.
Oh, well, look, I can help you. The year before was a funding surplus. and the $18 million deficit was adjusted upward to $20 million for last financial year, and this one has been adjusted up to 21 million. So, but look, thank you.
No, thank you.
Everyone's incredibly grateful. Wonderful. We'll go to Councillor.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted a clarification on the deficit, but that was already just discussed now. But just a question, I would assume that any way, anything that we choose to do or any decision that needs to be made, it's going to become forward in council. This is not a go ahead and get 175 million and that's it. I understand that we're going to be discussing this further. Correct?
Absolutely. So we'd be bringing the Treasury policy into the next session on the budget, so potentially on the 10th or the 15th. And just to be absolutely clear, and sorry if that's not clear on the slide, we're actually talking about the capacity to access borrowings, not necessarily to walk in and, you know,
that's right.
Say it's 175 mil and then walk back out with it the next day. And have it sitting, really was not the intent. It's absolutely to have some parameters about what you will and won't borrow for, and then making sure when we bring in initiatives that council may or may not want to fund, and if it's accessing borrowings, then making sure that council's doing that in an informed way.
Yeah, thank you. That's how I understood it, that you just want to know what our intent is in regards to looking at going ahead with the borrowings. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that for me. Well, we are a capital city, so yeah, so it's good to have these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Councillor Martin, just in the interest of time, just a very quick point. I'm trying to unmute you.
That's all right. It's just a question, Chair. I wonder, could the administration provide us with information calculating the various scenarios for the spending of the money and its impact on the long-term financial plan, reflecting not only when it might be anticipated we'd repay that debt and what the interest costs would be, anticipating likely interest rates?
Absolutely. Now that we have a long-term financial plan that is a lot more flexible and easily able to play around with, we could certainly do that live with council members potentially at the next session, bring that up, and Nicole is ready and waiting to showcase what that could look like. So we could give you potential scenarios, or you could share those with us, and then we can model that out and then show you over the life of that 10-year financial plan when you would return back to surplus, assuming you paid down debt, things like that.
That would be great. Thank you.
All right, I'll just make a quick point before we continue on. It seems that a lot of the remarks have been around the good debt, bad debt dynamic that that floats around these days. Obviously, as a nation and a state, we've been in debt for a long, long time, and sort of this is going to continue on. But I guess my views are that there is no such thing as good debt. There is bad debt and there is worse debt. Bad debt, which is the lesser of the two, bad debt is productive. And worse debt just keeps you exactly where you are. So I do echo everyone's thoughts around that. I'm not quite comfortable suggesting a particular dollar figure yet. It might be 175. It might be more than that, which may be necessary. So you know, I'll say it again. It's a lot. It's not ideal, but there is, and I acknowledge a very big difference. There is a very big difference to borrowing so that we can support our ratepayers, so that we can stimulate the economy, even so that we can waive rates where there's extreme hardship. There's a big difference between that and borrowing just so we can pay for our ongoing operational expenses. You know, I wouldn't want to see us continuing borrow money to pay staff to undertake work that will likely never happen because we're already in debt. Similarly, I don't want us to be borrowing to pay staff to send them out to go and, you know, wrap red tape around the city, which councils are notorious for, and those sorts of things. We need to be seeing how we can liberate and make our let our ratepayers do the best job possible. So those are my views on I guess debt. Like I said, not comfortable suggesting a figure now. It may well be more than that, and if there are worthy projects, I would encourage the administration to bring them to us and bring them forward, especially if something with a decent cost-benefit analysis and decent business case is actually going to pay off. On the point that Councillor Mackie made around land banking, absolutely, that's not really within our purview as a level of government. The only points I would make around that are we're going to see a concentration of wealth as a result of COVID-19. There will be, and that's actually my biggest concern, is that there'll be a concentration of wealth in the hands of bigger players which can weather the storm, and it's going to weed out smaller and medium-sized people and entities which can't weather the storm. And in the event that that would happen, I'd hate to see a concentration of land in the city end up in just a handful of hands, I suppose. And that's my risk. Also, there's the other perspective, which is potentially if a lot of property does end up coming on the market, council's proven it can be very effective in de-risking development of key sites in the city. That's something we should be keeping an eye on. The other aspect of that, of course, is that if there are key development sites that we can acquire with a view to de-risking them for their development, also to add population into the city, then we need to be considering that, not least of all because we are far behind our growth targets, far behind our growth targets. We're thousands short of really where we need to be. So that is something to consider as well. Of course, growth in the city underpins our whole economy. And the last thing I'd make about that is that we could potentially help the price stay up there and stop it from drastically falling, which would then affect the rates that we can collect from everyone in the city. So those are my views. But ultimately, the long short of it is not ideal. Yes, it should go up. Ultimately, it comes down to what we spend it on. And I think everyone's broadly on the same page with a lot of that. So I'll pass back to you, Claire. I'm not sure if that's your final slide.
Yep, so we're now moving to expenditure. So infrastructure first. Just a couple of comments from me before I hand over to Clinton to walk you through the proposed approach for 2020-2021. It's important to note that we are still proposing to fund approximately 25 to 30 million of infrastructure works. And one of the challenges we've had as an organisation in the last few years has been delivering an annual programme, and we know that that's really hard for us. So what we've invariably ended up with is a programme that actually gets delivered over 4 quarters plus 2 more, like a 5 to 6 year quarter delivery programme. And Councillor Martin has challenged us over many years to make sure that we manage our carry forwards and our approach in a more prudent manner. The other piece of data that I think is important to consider is that one of the IT challenges we've had over the past few years is that our asset information was held in a few different systems, and members will remember last year we asked you to consider investing in a new asset management system which will hold all the consolidated data. So what that will do is provide council members and the community with much better transparency and visibility around the condition of our assets, and it will enable Clinton to be able to plan and deliver really effectively in the coming years. So I'll hand over to Clinton just to explain what he's proposing for infrastructure.
Chair, and welcome, Clinton.
Evening, elected members. Thank you through the chair. So we're just currently up to slide 12 here for everyone's reference. Just firstly want to just cap off on the recovery principles around the infrastructure expenditure, some of which elected members will be familiar with already, but our focus and the opportunity for council is to focus on asset renewals and really focus in on prioritising those asset renewals based on our audited condition of the assets and based on a risk approach. The enhancements, we will still undertake asset enhancements, but we'll do that through partnerships and co-funding, which will lessen the drain on council budget and funds. And we will clearly need to seek government funding for any new infrastructure, certainly in the next 12 to 15 months. Just some of the key points from this slide. You are familiar with the immediate action we've had to take in terms of reducing expenditure in April, May, June this year. We've reduced our capital spend to only those essential projects that we have been committed to and committed to delivering prior to June 30. Other projects and other spend has been retimed and reprioritised into 2021 for consideration. Part of the opportunity for council is to consider our approach for 2020-21. We believe there is a clear opportunity for us to utilise next financial year as a reset year in the infrastructure space. There's a strategic lever for us to focus on delivery of our committed works. And when I say delivery, I mean really focus on delivering those works that we've committed to. We have the opportunity to eliminate the carry forward position that we have carried for a few years now, and give council the opportunity to eliminate that ongoing carry forward. And we also have the ability to target a significant amount of external funding to support our need to upgrade and renew our assets, which some of which I've taken council through already. As Claire mentioned, the asset management transformation project, where we introduce a new asset system to the business, is fundamental to all of this, and it will enable us to model, prioritise and predict our asset renewal spend for the next 10 years, and we'll bring that to council in the next few months. Next slide, thanks.
Sorry, Clinton, just while you're between slides, councillors, just to let you know that we are only at quorum just by one. So if anyone needs a comfort stop, just yell out before you scurry away, and we'll just adjourn quickly. Mary, is that a yes? You do? Okay. All right. We might just adjourn here just for a quick moment. Sorry, Clinton, because I can't afford to lose anyone. Thank you. Thank you. Members, feel free to use this moment as you see fit. Is that a hand, Councillor Martin?
May we have 5 minutes, resume at 7:03?
Show of hands, who's happy with that approach? Yeah, that is a-okay. We'll adjourn the meeting until then.
Thank you.
All right, members, we are back up to a quorum. Forgive me, I'm just dunking a yo-yo. Jenny, can you get the stream back up and running? All right, excellent. Members, we are resuming the meeting at 7:06, and we'll go back to you, Clinton. Apologies again for the interruption. Okay.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Just mindful I had been through one slide. Did the chair want me to start again or just continue on from where I left?
Recap the last one, just the headlines.
Quick recap. Okay, thank you. So just to take members through the previous slide, Jenny, slide 12, just quickly, the recovery principles that we're suggesting are considered is prioritising the asset renewals based on audit condition risk around those assets, looking to deliver our asset enhancements through partnerships with less drain on council's budget, and seeking government funding for new infrastructure. As I alluded to, we have reduced a capital spend in April, May, June this year, and we've looked to retime and reset for the 2021 budget, and with a key focus on delivery of the works that we've committed to, eliminating the ongoing carry forward nature of part of our budget and addressing the works that we have on the books, and targeting external funding to support the recovery of the budget issue. Moving to the next slide. Financial sustainability in an infrastructure sense is based on our ability to plan for our assets and manage our assets accordingly. Our asset management plans are being completed at the moment, and they're being done in line with the introduction of our new asset management system. The asset management plans will be based on some key considerations for council to consider: community needs, population density and growth impacts, and some asset management principles which we will be bringing into council for endorsement. Just on the right hand side of that slide there, there is our proposed approach. Towards the top of the screen, you'll see the long-term financial plan assumption, which planned for a $33.8 million infrastructure investment for 2021. Our proposed approach to council looks at an infrastructure program budget of 11.1 with an additional retimed from 1920 budget of 12.4. One thing to note will be the asset sustainability ratio as a result of that being 58%. And I'll talk to that on the next slide. Typically in local government, our asset sustainability ratio needs to sit somewhere between 90 and 110%. That's what the local government authority or association recommend. Notwithstanding that, we can operate outside of that, but clearly that's a short-term strategy and lever that we can pull or put forward to council, but we would need to consider how we manage that and the implications on future years. Some of the things for council to consider in answering the key question on the right-hand side will be the implications that we need to manage into 2021. Some of those implications include an increased maintenance consideration, definitely focusing on renewals rather than new and upgrade works in 2021. We will need to work outside of those LGA ranges for sustainability ratio. There is the risk of asset failure, although the risk is low and we can manage it for 1 year, it still needs to be considered, and the potential for reduction in service of our assets across the next 12 months. If I could pass back to the chair now, just to address the question for us. That would be great.
Thank you for that, Clinton. And I'll just scroll back up because I was reading ahead. So, members, how do we wish to utilise our budget for infrastructure? What are your priorities? What do you think, if anything, some of the risks are? And I guess, are you happy with those risks? Are you happy with our ability to manage those risks? Is there anything that you think's been put off for far too long and definitely needs to be renewed? Over to you guys. You must have done a wonderful job, Clinton. I think everyone's happy. Oh no, Phil's hand's gone up. I'd be disappointed if it didn't. There we go.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Look, there is so much in this document. I'm not going to single out everything that's of interest to me. Suffice to say that I'm pleased to see some things in there. Can I please ask the administration for our next meeting if we can have comparison tables? I know they're in some places, but in other places there are none. And I'm leaping to a section just as an illustration. When we read about the Dunstan Foundation, we see that our contribution is $115,000 proposed for 2021, but that's about a third of what we spend in the current financial year. Why is that? Just a small explanation would be useful. If I can ask a couple of questions though, and the first one is in respect of the Central Market Arcade development. Daily reported that the developer ICD and its Chinese partner Nanshan had not altered plans to proceed despite the onset of this pandemic. And as part of our $54 million contract, I remember there are cash payments beginning around the start of construction. Looking at these papers, all I can see is a contribution of $500,000 to the end of June next year, 3 months after the project was supposed to have begun. Now, could the administration advise if they're aware of any delay in the project?
Through the chair, I might just pass to Ian Hill to answer that question.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Back through the chair there. No, look, our head of property, Tom McCready, has been in regular contact with ICD and other proponents, other players of the consortium. Nothing indicated to us other than full steam ahead with the project, with the $27.74 million contribution of council, with a $1.39 million contingency if required for the $54 million development, which will be a $72 million return to our balance sheet. So I'm not aware, and nor is Tom, of any changes to the intent of the proponent ICD to proceed.
Well, that is good news. Thank you for that. In respect of Melbourne and O'Connell Streets, and let me just say I'm really delighted to see that the master plans are back in there. If any main streets deserve that funding for a master plan, it is O'Connell and Melbourne Streets. But I have a couple of questions in relation to lighting. There was a program for lighting for O'Connell Street and Melbourne Street, for which we saw designs, but I don't see any sign of it. I know about the fairy lights, but the real lighting program, is that in here anywhere?
So, Councillor, we're actually focusing on infrastructure. We get to the projects a little bit later when I can then clarify your query around the Don Dunstan Foundation. I could do that at that point. Did you, Chair?
Oh,
are you
no, okay,
comfortable
sorry.
that
Sorry,
we move now from infrastructure through to the next section, which is actually operations, then through to strategic projects?
I am, so long as there aren't any further question on these points.
Sorry?
Well, look,
So long as there aren't further questions on these points.
Okay, so
I've seen
DDF.
one hand go up, so
Okay.
hold off for the sponsorship, partnerships, and that sort of stuff until later.
That's what I'm asking, or need to ask. Is this the place where we talk about projects transferred to operations, or is that later on?
That's later on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, look, I'm sorry. I going backwards and forwards through the documents, I must have become confused.
That is quite all right. Councillor Mackie.
Thank you, Chair. Just in regard to the key questions, A, deliver a full program based on the existing asset management plans, or B, reset and prioritise. I will be supporting a reset and prioritising. Having worked for 15 years in the South Australian public sector, I shudder to think about the more perfect world that we might have lived in and managed as far as state government infrastructure goes, if we were able to be achieving even the scaled back version asset proposal that we're looking at. So, you know, I would like to think that we can weather through for this period and on a prioritising risk profiling, and also, dare I say it, asset improvements or asset repair, maintenance that will be visible and give confidence to our community that recovery is on its way, because yeah, just the risk profile in isolation will just potentially not serve us as well as balancing the risk and the impact ratios.
Thank you, Greg. Did you need a response to any of that by? No, all right. Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I also support a reset and reprioritisation of the program based on the fact that we are continuing, as we always have, to do condition audits and risk audits. There are several partnerships that will be delivered with the state government, so there will still be very visible enhancements throughout the city, and that will include the Whitmore Square project, which has just been announced, as well as Moonta Street, as well as the ones that are already in train, such as the skate parks and the Quinton Kernahan play space. There's plenty going on. We have already got quite a list of projects to deliver, but I absolutely support a reset and reprioritisation for the remainder of this year and for next year while we're in recovery phase.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Martin. Oh, sorry. Lay on it. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I'm a bit confused looking at the documents. If we go to page 33, I just heard the Lord Mayor say the Quinton Kernahan play space, and yet there's I can't see anything on the expenditure line at page 33. Is that a mistake, or am I misreading it?
No, it's definitely there, Councillor Martin. It is third from the bottom. Yeah. Quinton Kernahan inclusive play space 827. Is that? 3 major and commercial projects.
Yeah, page 33, it shows existing funding, 827,000. New funding nil. Is that correct?
That's what I'm looking at. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, so that's existing funding we're talking about, not new funding.
I believe it must be. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And insofar as the bikeways are concerned, then, am I reading it that $5.6 million of existing funding is available for the East-West Bikeway and 2.1 million is available for the North-South?
I'll just unmute Clinton, but no, I don't think that's correct. Clinton?
Sorry about that slight interruption. We lost our connection. Through the chair, all of the bikeway money has been effectively carried forward into next financial year. So there's no impact to any of the bikeways funding, still in accordance with the deed with Dipsy.
Okay, so reading that table on page 33, the only things which are proceeding are the Quentin Kernahan Place space, Moonta Street, Whitmore Square, which with government funding, Cityscape Park, the Park 22 improvements, North Terrace. No, North Terrace is postponed too, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
And Gawler U Park works are postponed as well. Is that right?
Gawler U Park works are ongoing, still funded.
Okay, thanks. All right. And look, the only other thing I'd like to add, Chair, is that I am delighted at the inclusion of Jeffcott Street. Again, thankfully, that is an absolute priority. I have actually had a couple of phone calls in the last week during the rain from residents inviting me to come and see their flooded street. I know that the northern end has had a lot of work done to it, pending its completion, but the southern end remains incomplete. And much as we've all grown fond of Lake Jeffcott over the years, it will be a pleasing thing to see it gone forever.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Members, any other commentary on this? No, thank you, Clinton. We'll move on. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean we'll move Clinton on, but if he's thank you.
Don't you dare. All right, we're on the home stretch. Slide 15, please, Jenny. No, is it 15? Yes, it is. So I'm just going to talk you through operations now at this point. Members will be aware from the workshop we did with you in October last year that there's been an ongoing program to rationalise our services. And in the last month or so, we've also been asked to look at reducing our operating expenditure by an additional 20 million. And just a reminder, in the last, I think it's 3 or 4 years, we've already delivered $12 million in operational efficiencies. And so the fundamental lever in the review of our operating expenditure is really taking a good look at our services. So using the recovery principle that our service delivery will reflect the needs of our community, we'll be engaging with you, as I mentioned earlier tonight, in an evidence-based assessment of our services in the context of two key inputs or outputs. Sorry. The first is, and Councillor Kira has touched on this earlier, it's understanding and sharing with you those services that are deemed essential, mandated or legislated as required under the Local Government Act. And members will remember that the information we've shared with you, either through the business continuity approach that Clinton's been leading during COVID, but also in terms of the background information to your October workshop last year, we now have a really good understanding and a baseline assessment of the cost of those services. The other really important thing that we want to work with you on is making sure that there's a shared view and a shared understanding of those services that are required to deliver on our strategic plan, but more importantly, our role as a capital city council. So that next session, that could be on the 20th or rather 23rd of June, will be in a position to work you through a framework to help you let us know which of those services you'd like us to take a closer look at. Already been committed to reforming our corporate support services in the context of continuing to deliver effective governance and robust financial management in line with those commitments that we made through the strategic plan and the enabling priorities that are part of that. A framework, as I've mentioned, is being developed to reshape our organisation, as soon as I have that day, we'll make sure that's in your diaries. Next slide, please. Go back. Any questions on that one? Or are you comfortable just to wait for a couple more weeks, please?
I think we'll take silence as Phil.
A quick question. The operations budget, I note from the documents that a lot of the projects appear to have been transferred to operations. Can you explain that for me?
Yes, based on some of the insights from audit committee last year, and it was when we were working through our end of financial year statements, it became really clear that how we're structuring some of our budgets needed to be simplified. The first session that we ran with you back in December, I think it was early December, on building next year's budget, we did share with you that we were planning to take those projects that are in effect business as usual, i.e. they continue year in, year out, and to transfer those into operations and look at that as a collective. At the time, Councillor, there was a concern that that would mean less transparency around those things that we know that council and community are interested and passionate in. The commitment back in December was that we would continue to make sure that any changes to those projects that are contained within the operations part of the budget would always be either discussed back with council and certainly make sure that we continue to show you those projects and make sure that there's clarity, visibility and transparency, and I think we undertook not to make changes to those without full visibility of the chamber. So yes, there has been a change in terms of how we're showing this, and it's to really simplify and be very clear about where the different expenditure items sit.
And can I ask then, where is grants and sponsorships, Festival Fringe and the myriad of smaller community grants?
So they're all sitting within operations. So if you go to Appendix 2 on slide 26, that's the first slide, live music, history festival, Renew Adelaide, community development grants. That's where they, yeah.
Okay, so how do we deal with this process? For example, I'm aware that some community development grants are up for renewal this year. Does that mean they won't come to council, or?
No, they will come to council. They're scheduled to come in June as per usual. So normally in June, you consider sponsorship and grants. We're at the end of some of our 3-year funding agreements. I know in particular in our community development grants. As always, we will share and ask council to make decisions on the next round of 3-year funding agreements as well as share with council those agreements and grants that have been done under CEO delegation, i.e. the smaller amount. So that's scheduled and it's coming through to committee next week. And is it next week? June, isn't it? Yeah. Committee and then council. So it's following the usual process of being considered in June.
Okay, well, look, I'm a little bit uneasy about this process, particularly as things which are in the pipeline can change. And you mentioned earlier the significant IT expenditure by administration, $3 million, I think it is, which is an extraordinary amount for us to be expending at this time. Without any real discussion about whether, in fact, that is a good thing. And similarly, you know, there are lots of amounts there that I would have thought we should talk about, like spending any money at all. I know it's reduced, but spending any money at all on city brand research, enhancing the City of Adelaide website, which has increased, by the way. I mean, I just feel uneasy about not having the opportunity.
Thank you. This is your opportunity, but
if that's the case, yep.
You're
okay,
uneasy about this. Okay, thank you for letting us know.
It does seem that, you know, when people are struggling to feed themselves, that we're spending $120,000 improving the City of Adelaide website when we could be doing something else for ratepayers, or $3 million. And I know it's a justified expenditure. I do understand how important it is, but the question is it important enough for us to be doing it at this time? And should we be having the discussion about that?
I think that was rhetorical, but thank you, Phil. Claire, just wanted to clarify, was there anything else you wanted to present before we go into the last round of questions? Because I might just, if there is, there's not much left, so I might just get through that.
No, that's pretty much it.
No.
I think all the information's there. We're happy to take questions in the coming days as well, if that's helpful, council members.
Yeah. Well, people might need some time to go through it, but in the meantime, Councillor Kira.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. Look, I'll make 2 points. One is that I think we ought to be guided by the principle of whether or not something is either essential or it provides a multiplier, an economic multiplier of some sort. I do agree with Councillor Martin. I've got comments and things about various of those items. I'll send them in an email. I think things like upgrading the website is a really good one to assess as to that test of whether it is necessary or whether it provides a multiplier. I think an excellent example of one that does both is Christmas. I think Christmas is the festival that will provide the most comfort after a year of absolutely extraordinary trauma for the public. Because it has that message of hope and joy and goodwill. I think that Christmas also has a multiplier. This is the great thing about Christmas. It is inherently a shopping festival. So it's a spending festival as well as a goodwill and comfort festival. So that is one that I would submit humbly to councillors to consider absolutely not allowing any reduction in spending on. I'll just leave it with a question about that, perhaps, Claire, if you could just articulate 300K figure next to 650 in previous years, at least 2 years ago. Can you articulate what the new actual spend will be just for that item, please?
Oh, bollocks. Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I just swore. I'm so sorry. I wasn't swearing at you, Councillor Kira. I was trying to unmute myself. Sorry,
Good. It's all right.
I knew my potty mouth I would come on that one day. Anyway, yeah, so
You're
sorry.
welcome to anytime.
Just in relation to your question, so there's two components to Christmas. One is around the activation, particularly in Victoria Square and some of the shop front activity that's been undertaken the last few years. That component has transferred into operations, and so you'll see a Christmas in the City line in there of, I think it's around 300. You'll also see that that there's a proposed request for the infrastructure side, which is sort of the new component, the 200k. So that's that one page of strategic projects. So we've just separated out the two pieces.
Okay, so there's no real reduction in net spend on Christmas.
No, not at this point. And members may be aware that we're actually bringing in a new Christmas action plan. So the previous one has been completed, and we're bringing the new one into workshop with council members in July.
Okay, right. I'll leave it there. I'll just reiterate that's Christmas is the big one that the public will look to us to really support this year. I think big time. Thanks.
Thank you, Jesse. Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I just had one question on the strategic project. The rest of them I'll come to individually. Is the Adelaide free Wi-Fi, which is on page 23. Can I just get clarification as to what that $900,000 will enable?
Thanks, Lord Mayor, and back through the chair. Basically, that's for, as everyone knows, the current Wi-Fi is a state government-owned contract that we contributed to previously. That's past its useful life, and the contract's actually expired, but it's still operational just. It's a very substandard service, but to your question, we're looking at 300 to 400 Wi-Fi access points throughout the city. So this would go towards the infrastructure to do that. We're also in negotiations, active discussions with two different parts of state government around support for that, and also through our city deal funding. So it's a piece of that puzzle.
Okay, all right. I was just sort of given the understanding of the other pieces. I wasn't quite sure about this one. Thank you.
Members, anything else? Otherwise, we're pretty much done.
Yep. I'm good.
There are any further questions. You can take them offline. Thank you again, everyone, for your attendance and good nature as we continue to go on Zoom. Or Mark, did you just want to sum up? Hold on.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wouldn't mind just saying a few words just to finish off with. I think it's very clear this is a very different budget process and challenge this year to any other year that any of us have experienced. And I think it's fair to say we're experiencing the biggest disruption to the City of Adelaide in recent memory. So, and that is, I guess, because of the immediacy of COVID-19 and its impacts on our community. So I think we really do need to think carefully about a bunch of things, particularly our sustainability ratios. I think we need to think of our sustainability ratios in terms of COVID-19 sustainability ratios, and they're going to be very different for the next few years. And I think that's something to be mindful of. I really do think we need to carefully consider how we do help our ratepayers and how we do augment our income generating capacity and opportunity. And I think we really need to be very mindful of our own financial sustainability as an organisation. I think we need to see this as a bit of a step change for the City Council. And in my view, the role of government has never been more important, particularly when we talk about opening up the city in the future, maintaining our core services, which we've talked about tonight, and being ready to commit committing to stimulus funding opportunities that we may receive or may see an opportunity from the state and federal government. So My view is that, we really must reduce our operating expenditure while still meeting the needs of the community. And that's a clear view from council members that we've seen from previous resolutions and discussion tonight. I think we need to really think about rationalising our services and still meeting the needs of our role in governing a capital city. So it's an interesting tension we have there. And I think we need to position ourselves at the forefront of opening up the city. And to do that, we are going to need to consider carefully increased borrowings, and we're going to need to adjust our asset renewals approach, which has been discussed tonight. Further to there tonight, we've got the budget discussion that we scheduled for the 10th of June. And then on the 23rd of June, we're looking to approve the business plan and budget for consultation purposes. So that's the process we're looking to get towards. We're looking to approve an expenditure framework, approve fees and charges, and at the same time consider operating expenditure rationalisation of services. So that's the kind of time frame we've got. Don't have a lot of time to work through, and that's as a result of the consequence of the experience we've had over the last few months. So it's quite a challenge for us to meet and to work through, and we're going to need your patience and your input to get there. So I think tonight's been really useful to really have a good conversation and to explore some of the key issues and get some feedback and answer your questions. So I look forward to meeting with you again on the 10th, where we can go to the next stage that we need to. So also, I think Claire's done a great job to pull it all together in the team. And I think it's probably been one of the most clear and I guess practical approaches in recent times as well. So thanks, Chair.
No worries, Mark. And thank you, Pressure Makes Diamonds. So it'll be great to see us sparkle. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks.
Bye.